So this is democracy in action. It's tedious, it's technical, it's very pedantic, and I wouldn't be any other place in the world right now. It's great. I'm proud of all of you. You have disagreed, but you have not been disagreeable. We're starting to understand that we need to separate the desire for future improvement from where we're at today. So deficiency, administrator. You define the properties. What does an administrator do? What do you want out of an administrator? What's the functional and non-functional requirements? Use product lingo, okay? Once you've done that, if somebody's arguing a smart contract can satisfy that, what do? They write the smart contract, right? And then by definition, it satisfies the requirements. It is an administrator, and it has the rights of an administrator. There you go. What's the intent behind that? Well, every nation state has certain functions about it. If you mess with the United States of America, as I was saying during my AMA, we will go to the ends of the earth to make your life miserable, including sending people in the middle of the night in helicopters, okay? So that's why it's really not a good idea. So what happens when you mess with a blockchain? Who are the Navy SEALs of the blockchain? What's the recourse? Well, blockchains in most governments in the world don't have legal character or agency. So that administrator language, why was that put there? It was put there because I wanted to protect people. We wanted to protect people. We wanted to have a situation if somebody defrauds the Cardano ecosystem, there's an entity that can sue. Pretty simple, right? Makes sense. So when we think about this, what we have to think about is holistically and say, where's the world going? And if we don't know, let's be ambiguous, because we don't know and we don't want to overprescribe. And if we do know, let's direct our efforts in a way that ensures that it grows in that direction. I know a few things about the Cardano treasury. I know, one, it's going to get bigger over time. Number two, it's going to get diverse. Because of partner chains, there's a path where people who issue partner chains pay fees and block rewards, a percentage of them, just like ADA, into the treasury. So we go from a one token treasury, ADA, to an N token treasury, many different tokens inside that treasury. Okay, well, who manages that? We have to think about it. So generic language like administrator, it gives you a cop-out as a constitutional drafter to say, well, the community can figure that out, and sufficiently broad, probably we can have a third party if we want to manage that and figure out if we want to sell certain tokens and buy certain tokens. Like, for example, what if we succeed and become the DeFi layer of Bitcoin? 20 years, billions of Bitcoin transactions on Cardano. What does that mean? We have accumulated an enormous amount from transaction fees of wrapped Bitcoin in the Cardano treasury. We could end up holding 10,000 or 100,000 Bitcoin in Cardano's treasury. What do we do with it? Who decides that? How do we manage that? So as constitutional drafters, these are some of the thought experiments as you kind of go through and you're thinking about voting yes or no, or you're deciding what's a today concern versus a tomorrow concern. You have to start asking that. The same for ADA. Like, for example, we're always thinking in terms of selling ADA. We stabilize the asset, we convert it into USDC or USDM or something like that so people could be paid because of volatility. But what if we have a sovereign wealth fund and it makes a lot of money for Cardano? Is there ever a situation where the interest that the treasury is gaining from its assets, which could even be physical, like gold and land at some point in the future, makes enough money that it starts buying ADA off the open market and giving it back into the treasury? Norway did this, not a cryptocurrency, but they put their sovereign wealth fund into that. Got $1.5 trillion. Norwegians are rich, man. They made very good decisions. We did not in America. And so we're in debt up to our eyeballs. They're going to give us a bailout one of these days. We'll go and talk to Uncle Sven. So something to think about, not prescribing one way or the other, but as constitutional authors, you have to always have one foot in the future and one foot in the present. Present is about what is going to be a concern in the near horizon and what are some foundational things we need to put in so that we're able to navigate in the future. What work streams do we require so that we can grow in the directions that we want to grow into? Another thing to consider here is that governments are easy to overbake and overconstruct. You can spend thousands and thousands of, and believe me, I'm surrounded by scientists and cryptographers and engineers. I've had these conversations arguing about things that could happen in life. technically speaking, one of those Starlink satellites that's floating around could come crashing down from the sky and hit the roof in just the right way and kill me on this stage. It actually is in the probability space of events that are possible. I have a better chance of winning the lottery 3 times and marrying Gisele Bündchen. It's not going to happen. Okay? So why then do I need to think about how do I shield myself from that falling satellite? So always, when you're constructing these types of things, you missed. I would encourage you as delegates to push your efforts in directions of stuff that if we fuck it up, it kills everybody, stops the dream. Get that solved. You have to leave this room, if you're voting yes, in your heart thinking, I am like a doctor, done no harm. You have to leave this room with the belief that you think it's either going to improve things or at least not harm things. And if you think there's something catastrophic that this document contains, even if everybody else is voting yes, vote no for it. That's my advice to you, because this is one of your duties as a delegate, to create that foundation. And then a discussion can be had, and people can put collective wisdom together, and there can be a real understanding of why is this a problem and how do we resolve it. That's how you make forward progress, because the other stuff is still important, but governance systems need time to bake. The United States of America, the Constitution wasn't our first governing document. The Articles of Confederation were. And only after our soldiers not getting shoes in wintertime and not being properly fed and having a litany of other problems and nobody taking us seriously on the world stage, did we realize that we kind of sort of needed a new document because the system that the Articles of the Confederation designed was not suitable. And the people going into the U.S. Constitutional Convention carried those grievances because in many of them were people missing toes and fingers and skin from not having shoes in winter because they fought in the Revolutionary War. Almost all of them were part of that shared experience. And they understood the problems that came from that. So everybody in Cardano land, once we get a constitution through, is going to live with the consequences of a constitution. Positive or negative, good and bad. They're going to endure, for better or for worse, the wisdom of this crowd. And one of the most important work streams is our ability to communicate and measure outcomes. Okay? So we need to know honestly and objectively what's going on. One of the SIPs we're going to write, and we're going to try to get this in through software, is some form of a pub subsystem for when you delegate to a DREP, you delegate to a stake pool operator, or send funds to a contract, there's a mechanism to subscribe to it. Why? Because it's probably important that people be in communication with the DREPs. And it's probably important that the DREPs be in communication with the people who trust them and delegate to them. It's such a simple thing, but it's a very powerful thing because it's a dialogue. And that's your antenna to detect errors in the system. So as delegates, that's another work stream as you look at the work streams here, to integrate into all of those work streams to ask, how will we know when it's not working? How will we know? And is that detection system sufficient or is it problematic? A few years back, there was a submarine called the Titan that OceanGate built. And that lovely engineer, Stockton Rush, he said, you know what? I have the most advanced hull. It's carbon fiber. It was built and it's great. I said, well, how do you know if it has a problem? He said, oh, I have this detection system right here. It'll begin beeping if there's an issue. Okay. Well, catastrophic implosion kills you in less than 0.0001 seconds. So, like, do you get an hour notice? Do you get 30 minutes? Do you get like a minute? Nah, it's like about, actually it comes off when the hull is compromised. Oh, so you'll be dead before you even hear it. Not a good system, right? He wasn't a very good engineer. You're engineers of society. So as you build these things, always keep in the back of your mind, and if you don't think there's enough in this and there's not a work stream accounting for it, vote no until there is. This is an opportunity to ask, what are the detection systems to know this is wrong? There's a problem in the house. Okay? That's why the administrator, going back to that, not to hark on that example, but I don't feel comfortable unless I know there's some legal entity that's gonna have to be accountable in some way to answer the community were the funds wasted or not. It's a very important thing because this is your money. If you mined ADA, you transacted, 20% tax was put on you and me and the foundation and others for that. The treasury didn't just come from nowhere. It got filled as a consequence of economic activity. It's the people's money. It should never be wasted. It should never be stolen. So we have to ask ourselves, do we feel that there's an appropriate control mechanism in place, either here or there or somewhere, where that's okay? And if it's not, then vote no until you get comfortable on behalf of the people that elected you for such a thing. Okay? And then people need to be reasonable and understand there's separations of powers and different layers and these things. And it's true for all articles in this. The advantage of the process we followed is we've already had these conversations. This is not the first time you've seen this. This is not the first time you've thought about this. All of you have invested an enormous amount of time. So the foot that you have in the present is not on mud, it's on granite. It's on a very thick ground. You probably already have strong opinions. You probably have already thought about concerns. So as we close out the week, I'd encourage the other foot, the foot that's looking towards the future, to find that equal solid ground. And if you don't know, this is why it's so good for all of us to be in person. Talk to people. These are your neighbors, your colleagues. These are people who care just as much as you, and have those types of conversations, especially the people that are voting no. What is keeping you up at night? And maybe you have an answer, maybe they have an answer. And that's how this process continues. And we will converge. And surprisingly so, we've already made enormous progress if you think about it. Every step of the way, every temperature check, every committee meeting, every single time we've had a workshop, we have changed something. We've grown a little bit, and the language gets a little bit better. Another component of good governance and leadership is understanding that people will always have different perspectives than you. The equity example is a real-life example of that. If you're a non-native English speaker, words seem the same. But if you live in certain societies and cultures, especially societies and cultures that tend to use language in a very particular way, they're saying things in a very particular way to attempt to elicit a philosophy. Why should somebody who wasn't born in that culture natively understand that? Why would they? Is it fair to imprint that ideology on them and say, well, they should know this, they should know better? You know, people who grew up in the Soviet Union, I had many friends who came from the former Soviet Union. You could never criticize the government. It's the surest way to get yourself killed. So they developed a hidden vocabulary for telling people actually what's happening. And so if you were from Eastern Europe or from Russia, you actually, if you're older, know this vocabulary. So it's like a way of criticizing the government without criticizing the government. That's socially acceptable. You tell it to an American, it goes way over your head. You're like, okay. You don't pick up the nuance. You tell it to an old Russian, he's like, holy shit, Gorbachev did that? Oh my God, right? So context matters. And if we don't have the context before immediately reacting and pouncing on people, it's probably good to have a conversation. I was just talking to Einstein about that earlier today, and he pointed that out, very rightfully so. It's super important we take the time if somebody's having a very passionate reaction to something like the word equity, kind of try to understand where they are coming from and why they're so concerned about it. And then usually what ends up happening, if you have an open conversation like we did, you achieve the same goal, which was fair and impartial. In this case, literally, we just took the definition and took the words out of the definition, put them in the Constitution. Great fix, guys, smart. But everybody's happy. There's no winners and losers, right? It's win-win. That's what listening, that's what cooperation, that's what discussion gets people at the end of the day. We have to prove to the world we have a right to lead. And we can't do that unless we lead ourselves. And this is our first major governance challenge as an ecosystem. People who've never met each other before or knew each other from distance have come together to Argentina and to Nairobi to have a discussion about the future of a $40 billion ecosystem that has the potential to be a $1 trillion ecosystem and has already changed the lives of millions and is waiting for the right to change the lives for billions. You are the gatekeepers for the next step of the evolution. The collaboration models here are a work stream unto themselves. How you meet, talk to each other, what you do and what you don't do is how we will evolve and grow the government. That's a thread that should never be lost because it's going to happen again. we will have another update to the Constitution. And so a retrospective is not only important, it's vital for this process. And it's important that you stay in contact with each other. These are permanent friends that you're going to have for the rest of your lives. These are people that you will know 10 years from now or 20 years from now. You're going to talk to these people on a regular basis and get to know them. So I would encourage you to maintain those relationships and contacts. I encourage you to spend some time with them and make sure that you have each other's phone numbers, make sure you're in the same Discord, make sure you're in Telegram, whatever messaging apps you use those. Because in the process of using those, you can then have conversations about what are the next steps, where are we at, where are we not. You can do a temperature check every single day, and I will tweet weird memes about it. That's how you get greatness. That's where Bitcoin came from. I was there in the very early days. It was not about the money. You know that meme of the guy in the gold chainmail saying, I'm in it for the technology. We actually were in it for the technology because Bitcoin wasn't worth anything. It was like $1 or less. And it went up to $30 and we said, oh my God, this is so insane. It's at $30, can you believe it? And it collapsed to 4 and everybody's like, well, that was fun. Let's all go home. What kept Bitcoin alive was that people literally did that. They kept talking to each other. They kept in contact with each other. I can't tell you how many numbers I have on my phone that are 14 years old that now belong to billionaires. All of them are in the Bitcoin space. It's like, did some space stuff recently, had to talk to Jed McCaleb. He turns out he owned the company that I was talking to. I said, Jed owns your company? He's like, yeah, I just called him. Because I had his number. You know, I remember him as the guy who started Mt. Gox before he sold it to Mark and Mark fucked it up. That was my recollection. Yeah. Had some fights with the XRP community. Yeah, that's the Jed I know, not the guy building space stations. That's pretty cool. You see, and there's going to be a Jed in this room, right? You guys are the future. You're the entrepreneurs. You're going to build the dApps. You're going to do great things. At least one of you is going to break through and do something really significant that will change probably your nation. Somebody in this room might be a president one day. I guarantee it, because you have the appetite for that. So that's why it's important you stay in contact, because you're going to need those contacts for yourself and others. And in the process of doing that, keep working, keep pushing forward. We have a lot more to do. Whether it's a yes vote or no vote, we will continue pushing. We eventually will get to yes, one way or the other. And when we do that, that is a milestone, a checkpoint. The work streams will continue. The process will continue, and eventually we will get to a much better government than the one that we have here today. But I hope this gives you some lessons and gives you some wisdom about how to think about it. I'm not going anywhere. I just have a different role, and I'm trying very hard to recuse myself as much as possible. In closing, I've said this on Facebook, and I've said this on Reddit and Twitter and other places. I mentioned that after the new government turns on, input-output will not have an official function. We're currently an interim constitutional committee member. We're not going to be running for the constitutional committee, and we will not be participating as a DREP. So I'm recusing myself from the on-chain government. I could easily stay in, but I chose to stay out because you need to create space for fresh blood and new leaders. You've all heard from me for a decade. You know how to reach me. You see my AMAs, you see Twitter, but what about all of you? How do people reach you? How do people get your profiles? How do people get your ideas? And if it's just my ideas, no matter how good they are, they're flawed in that they miss things. How many things have I missed that you wish I didn't miss? How many fights have I started that you wish I didn't start? And you know what? This room is much better able to run things than a guy like me, because you know what? You're going to catch each other. And the aggregation of you is going to have a lot more wisdom and systematic consideration. And you've already proven that by the fact that we are this close to a ratified document. And within 48 hours, there's a better than 50% chance that we will have that after 2 years of discussion for something so controversial. The Bitcoin ecosystem, as big and magical and incredible it is, has never been able to come together with a single code of ethics, a single unifying document with integrity. There's hundreds of millions of them. They're worth $2 trillion. Nation states are thinking about buying it as a sovereign asset, but they don't have a constitution. It's applied, but if you tried to do this in Bitcoin, it would fail. And guess what? We're 48 hours away from having potentially a document that can go and get ratified, where we succeeded at a scale of millions of people in over 100 countries for those people. That is an achievement of a lifetime. If it's the only thing you ever did in your life, it's pretty fucking special. So give all of yourselves a pat on the back for that. This industry is watching, as I've said before, and they're watching this process. There's so much skepticism. People say it can't be done. They say it's just not possible to bring a decentralized ecosystem together without a king or a leader or a dictator and just force upon people governance, especially without the power of a barrel of a gun. You did it in a way that no one has ever done it before, and you have converged to a point. So that gives me hope, and that gives me absolute belief that the future is not only going to be better than the past, but it will be decentralized. So thank you for realizing the dream that I laid on the table in my TED Talk in 2014 when I talked about all the magical things that blockchain can do. Not only have you proven it can do it, you've proven to the entire world that it can do it. And the next part means that we actually get a chance to change the rest of the world. So thank you all. Thank you. Look at that.